Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be joining us from. Welcome to Wise at Work Virtual Communities. My name is Parneet Paul. I am the Chief Science Officer at Wisdom Labs, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all to the session on breaking the worry habit loop with our special guest, Jud Brewer. Now, if you have been joining these communities with us before, we're really happy to see you back on again. But if you're new to Wisdom Labs and to Wise at Work virtual communities, we are a San Francisco-based company. We're solving for stress, burnout, and loneliness in the workplace using the science of mindfulness, resilience, and compassion. And we work with organizations globally to build these communities of practice for employees. And when COVID happened, we wanted to be able to offer something in response that would be of benefit to our community, to each of you. And so we started hosting these 30-minute online gatherings each Wednesday, where folks from all over the world like you can join in and learn from an amazing repertoire of teachers that we have who have generously donated their time to share their wisdom with us on how we can manage our difficult emotions, how we can become more resilient through this crisis. So please make sure that you join us every week. We're going to do this at least till the end of June. And today we have an extraordinary guest. Dr. Jud Brewer is an addiction psychiatrist. He is the head of research and innovation at Brown University's Mindfulness Center. He's also an associate professor at the medical school there. And really, Judd is the authority when it comes to thinking about not just the science of mindfulness, but how that affects our habits and how we can gain more self-mastery and do habit change well. If you haven't watched his TED Talk, please do. It's been viewed millions of times and you will really enjoy it. And what Judd does so brilliantly is that he translates the science into app-based learning and other practices to help people with anxiety, with emotional eating, with smoking, and many other cravings as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Judd. And Judd, welcome, and thank you so much. Can't wait what you have to say to us.
Great. Thanks, Parneet. Thank you so much. I thought we could just start with maybe I'll give a little bit of background around how our minds work. The way I think about this clinically is if we don't know how our minds work, we're not going to be able to work with them. If we can learn how our minds work, we can work with them, whether it's working with anxiety or worry or other habits as well. Maybe after that or during this, we'll do a little bit of a practice, and then I'd be happy to take some questions around the topic because I'm sure it is live for many, many of us. So if we think about this from a survival standpoint, as a neuroscientist, I'm trying to understand, what are the mechanisms of how the mind works, whether it's meditation or just habit change. And they're very actually pretty well-known processes that have been set up evolutionarily speaking to help us survive. And so there's this survival brain that we have that helps us learn through what's called reinforcement or reward-based learning. A simple example of that would be, and I mentioned this in my TED Talk, that we have these three elements of a habit loop where there's a trigger, a behavior, and a reward. So from a survival standpoint, if we see food, that's the trigger, we eat the food, that's the behavior. And then our stomach sends this dopamine signal to our brain that says, remember what you ate and where you found it. That's the reward. So that helps us learn things in terms of getting nutrient to survive. We also learn how to avoid danger, right? Let's say in modern day, if we walk out into a busy street, we almost get hit by a car. We learn, when I walk up to a busy street, there's the trigger that my behavior should be look both ways. And then the reward is I don't get killed. So I can live to repeat that process in the future. So we can see this helping us both in terms of gathering things like getting nutrients, getting food, and also avoiding danger. So you can think of that as like our survival brain. On top of this is layered neocortex, which literally means new brain. And that part of the brain is is geared toward helping us think and plan. So this involves brain regions like the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex needs something really important for it to work, which is information. So if we don't have accurate information, we can't plan for the future because we run these simulations in our brain based on previous experience that takes current information in and says, okay, based on what I did before, here's the current information. This is how I can plan for the future. The problem is right now, we don't have a ton of accurate information. It's hard to even get a sense for example, how many people are infected with COVID-19. That information could help us plan. Like, how long do we keep the social isolation? How long do we do this? How many medical supplies do we need in certain cities? So you can see how having that information really helps us plan, whether it's planning for tomorrow or planning for next week. Now, our thinking brains don't just stop thinking when we don't have accurate information. Our thinking brains actually start to spin out in these what if scenarios. So they start thinking about, well, what if this, then I can do this. What if this, and then I can do this. What if this, I can do this. So we can think of, these fear-based learning mechanisms, which are survival oriented. When you pair that with uncertainty or a lack of information, that combination leads to anxiety. And we start worrying about the future rather than being able to plan. I think of that as, like take home point number one. Fear plus uncertainty equals anxiety. Fear by itself, if we have enough information, we can learn from it. If we don't have enough information, it leads to anxiety. What I've been seeing a lot over the last couple of weeks is that anxiety actually gets coupled with another contagion. So a virus or a bacteria can be spread through physical contact. We actually know a lot about, how social distancing, for example, how much distance should we keep from each other to not get infected with a virus. Yet there's another type of contagion that's been around for a long time. Many of you may be familiar with the term called social contagion, which is basically just the spread of affect or emotion from one person to another. Think of it as an emotional infection, or an emotional infection. So this is especially contagious because somebody can sneeze on your brain from anywhere in the world. You don't have to be within 6 feet or 8 feet of somebody and have them breathe on you to get infected by this. You can go on social media, you can get on a phone call, you can get on a WhatsApp call, and you can get infected by somebody else's emotions. So if you get on a call with somebody and they're anxious, you're more likely to get anxious. If you go on social media and everybody's panicking, then it's more likely that we can become panicked as well. We can also see this at the grocery store. And if anybody has gone to the grocery store, you might see some bare shelves, and maybe you've seen somebody who's got a cart full of whatever. The meme seems to be toilet paper for whatever reason. So you go in the grocery store with your list of things to buy. Your thinking brain is online. You see somebody else, grabbing all of the milk or all the eggs or all the toilet paper or whatever. And then your thinking brain goes offline because this scarcity mode kicks in and says, hey, you should get that before it goes away, before there's none left. And so, we might be, not planning to buy something at the grocery store, but we see somebody else buying all of it. And then we think, well, I need to get in on that before it's all gone. And we can even do panic buying, which I'm sure many of us have seen, hence some of these empty grocery store shelves. You get home, or you get out to your car and you realize I can't even fit all this stuff in my car, or, the milk's going to go bad before you can drink it all. We can see how this irrational behavior, which is literally the definition of panic, which is like wild, uncontrolled anxiety leading to wildly unthinking behavior. This gets online when we've got fear plus uncertainty plus, some social contagion and maybe a little bit of scarcity. That can lead to our thinking brain completely going offline and us doing things that are completely irrational. And we look back on them and say, wow, that's not so helpful. So I think those are a couple of pieces to keep in mind. Before I just want to talk a little bit more about uncertainty, and then maybe we can talk about what we can do about this. Uncertainty itself, is really important to pay attention to. And I just want to highlight, that uncertainty drives us to action. So maybe we can all take a moment and just drop into our experience and feel into think of something that's uncertain for you. And I'm sure we can all relate. We can think of something, whether it's, how long is the shelter in place order for me going to last wherever I live? Feel into that uncertainty and feel what it feels like. Notice if there is some restlessness there. Uncertainty tends to light this fire under our butt, or maybe a better analogy would be it feels very itchy. We feel restless and we have to start scratching that itch. And so that uncertainty actually drives us to action, because our brain is saying, hey, I need information, and I'm going to make you uncomfortable until you get me what I need, which is information. Now, sometimes we don't have that accurate information. So our brain says, well, just do something. Don't just sit there, do something. And so we can trip into worrying, because worrying can actually feel like doing something. Now, worry is particularly interesting because anxiety and worry can get perpetuated as a habit loop, just like stress eating can. So for example, if we're feeling comfortable and we eat a snack, it can momentarily distract us from that uncomfortable feeling, or we get that, that brief relief that comes with the dopamine hit of eating some ice cream or whatever. But that actually just perpetuates us to eat ice cream, not when we're hungry, but when we're stressed. So we can see how stress eating can get set up in a theoretical, habit loop. I say theoretical, it's a real habit loop, but it's not really helping us survive. This is what leads to obesity, diabetes, and all these things. So it's actually moving us in the opposite direction of survival than the way these mechanisms were set up. Yet that's what our brain is doing. It's saying, oh, I'm going to learn this way. Worry can actually set up in the same way. If anxiety or fear triggers a mental behavior of worry, that mental behavior of, oh, I'm worrying about this, I'm worrying about that, I'm worrying about this, that can actually result in that feeling like, well, I'm doing something. Even if I'm not solving any problems, I'm actually doing something. And so it can feel a little bit rewarding into itself. So I want to highlight that because, a few years ago, I hadn't even realized that worry can get perpetuated in the same way that any other habit loop can. And there's a decades old literature on this. There's a guy, Borkovic at Penn State, who wrote a lot about this decades ago. So I bring up worry because I see a worry happening a lot right now. And I will now talk about, if we can understand these basic mechanisms of how our minds work, we can then start to work with them. So we can understand and start to see our own habit loops. Actually, this might be a good time for any of us to just pause and check in to see, what habits do I have that are maybe getting perpetuated or getting exacerbated now that I'm home and near my refrigerator, or maybe new habits that I've been setting or getting caught in that I didn't have before. Just check to see what habits you might have related to this pandemic. One example of a habit that I've been seeing a lot is the habit to check the news, or getting addicted to checking news feeds. That's also related to uncertainty, and our brain saying, maybe I'll get more information. And actually, I've been putting out daily YouTube videos, short videos that describe this. I put out one on why our brain treats the news like a slot machine. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can just check out my YouTube channel, which is just Dr. Judd, Drjud. But back to the worry piece, for any of you that have noticed that a worry habit loop is emerged or has been kind of perpetuated during this time, my lab at Brown actually studies, these underlying mechanisms. What is it about worry, and how can we actually target it? So we've started looking at these mechanisms. We've actually found that you can tap into the same reward-based learning system that sets up these habit loops in the first place to actually help us step out of them. And we've even developed some app-based mindfulness training programs that we've done some research on. I won't go into all the details, but for example, we did a study. There was a study that was led by Ashley Mason at UCSF that studied our Eat Right Now app, where she found that they could actually target these reward-based learning mechanisms around stress eating and reduce craving-related eating by 40%. More recently, my lab has actually looked at the worry mechanisms, and we've just last week we published a paper with anxious physicians showing that app-based mindfulness training, the app that we studied here was called Unwinding Anxiety. This Unwinding Anxiety app could actually reduce physician anxiety by 57%, which is really gratifying to see because anything that we can do for healthcare workers right now is sorely needed. We also found that we could reduce burnout by 50% because a lot of burnout aspects like callousness are related to worry and anxiety. And we just did another study with people with generalized anxiety disorder, also found a 63% reduction in anxiety. So I just bring that up because, if we can understand these mental mechanisms, we can target those specifically. And that second study that I mentioned with the Unwinding Anxiety app, where we got this 63% reduction, we could actually measure the mechanism of what was happening. And we found that as people used the mindfulness training program, they increased their mindfulness, their aspects of mindfulness. That led to a direct, formerly called mediated a reduction in worry. And that reduction in worry mediated a reduction in anxiety. So for me as a scientist, that's gratifying to see, okay, we can work out the mechanism. For me as a clinician, it's also helpful to be able to understand this and know that, there's an evidence base behind, some of these things around mindfulness. So I know we don't have a lot of time here. Maybe I thought we could just finish with a short practice together. And one thing that I do with my patients is start by having them become aware of their habit loops. And that's the first thing I'll have them do. And then from there, they can start to work with them. And again, I give some specific tools on my YouTube channel about how to bring mindfulness tools in. You can certainly take a look at those, but maybe we could just take a minute now and just map out specific habit loops that we might all be perpetuating right now. So just take a moment and take a habit loop, whether it's eating, whether it's worry, whether it's anything else, and then just see if you can notice what it is that typically triggers that behavior. See if you can map that out in your own mind. And next, just see what the behavior is itself. Can you clearly, demarcate it? Is it worry? Is it trying to plan? Is it trying to feel in control? I was just on a group that I was leading where somebody was talking about how she had all of these things that she needed to do, yet she found that she would just distract herself by watching Netflix as a way to make herself temporarily feel better. So that was her habit loop, was watching Netflix. And then the next thing is to just ask ourselves, well, what's the result of this? And not from a thinking perspective, but from a direct experiential perspective. What do I get from stress eating? What do I get from worrying? What do I get from whatever my habit loop is? And just feel into that experientially, not in a thinking way, but in a feeling way. What does it feel like? What's the direct result of this? And the reason I bring this forward is that really seeing these results clearly, this is what mindfulness is all about. It's about seeing the cause and effect relationship of our behavior and the result of that relationship. Result of that behavior. What happens when I do this? And we can actually see how this lines up neurobiologically, because the results, or the quote unquote reward or not reward of a behavior, is what drives future behavior. We've actually, my lab's done some work where we found that, having people pay attention as they eat helps them update that reward value. If they overeat, they see that it's not that rewarding. If they stop eating when they're full, they find that it's actually more rewarding than overeating. And in this way, they can step out of these, I should stop overeating, or I should not worry, and to simply drop into their direct experience and feel, oh, wow, this isn't doing it for me. This isn't really helping me. And that change in reward value is what helps lead to lasting change in a way that doesn't require force or effort or willpower. So I'm going to stop there. And I know that was a very brief mapping practice, but actually seeing these things clearly is the first step for us to change any behavior. So I will stop there. I'm going to invite Parneet to join me back on screen. And maybe, Parneet, you can help me answer, or we'll answer a few questions as we have time. related to what we just talked about. I know it was a lot. So please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judd. That was revolutionary. And for all of our attendees, please type in your questions into the chat room and we'll see how many we can address. But meanwhile, Judd, I found, I know a lot of folks were talking about decision fatigue. And I think that's one of the things that they're beginning to notice, that when they rest in this kind of worry loop, can you talk a little bit about, the fact that our attention spans are limited and the brain needs to rest and how we might turn this around? So once we notice what's happening with us, how might we do something positive or healthy in order to combat that worry and concern?
Yeah, thank you for that. And so I'll just very briefly with decision fatigue, we can actually bring the same framework in and we can ask ourselves, when I'm trying to decide between 5 or 6 things, what do I get from this? The trying to decide is the behavior. We can look at the result. Well, what do I get? I feel fatigued. So that invites us to experiment with that and say, okay, well, if I get fatigued when I'm trying to decide between, a bunch of different things, what happens when I dial it back and simply say, okay, I'm trying to decide for weeks out. Let me dial it back to this week, to today maybe, and let's see if that narrowing the scope helps me be able to make concrete decisions right now for what I need to do. And then if we can make those decisions, it's important to look back on that and say, well, what does that feel like? Oh, I actually made a decision. I moved forward. That feels better than getting fatigued with the others. So hopefully that gives folks something to play with around the decision fatigue. But in terms of positive things, I'm so glad you bring that up. I put a YouTube video about this a couple of weeks ago where I talk about, kind of making connection the new infection. So in the same way, we can see how unrewarding it is to be stuck in old habits. And maybe a habit could be around guilt and shame, right? We're isolating at home. It's actually the best thing we can be doing, but we feel guilty because we see healthcare workers or other folks out there, doing stuff. So we can map out these habit loops around guilt and shame and realize, oh, that doesn't feel very good. And then we can say, well, what's it like, when I just really pay attention to my family members and, I spend 15 minutes and just, put all my distractions away and I just spend really good quality time, with my partner, with my kids, with my pets, whatever. And we can start to see, wow, when I'm actually connected, that feels better than being, than rushing around on social media and trying to do all this stuff that might make me feel like I'm around people, but I'm not actually that connected. And in the same way, we can look to see what it's like, when we're kind to others. If we go to the grocery store and we see people rushing around grabbing stuff, and if we feel that urge to go and grab stuff instead, what's it feel like when we actually step back or we give something, we're like, give half of the toilet paper, whatever, that we were taking to somebody else that wanted it. What does that feel like? It just feels better. Kindness feels better. And I think I love this poem by Naomi Shihab Nye, who talks in a poem called Kindness, where she talks about you have to lose things to really feel what kindness feels like. And I think we've all lost something, small and large. We've all lost our normal way of life. I don't know anybody whose life is exactly the same as it was a month ago. And she says, only then do you see the size of the cloth, like how we're all, suffering like this together. And then also, she says, this is so beautiful. She says, only then, kindness is the only thing that makes sense anymore. And so my hope is that we can make a collective shift by seeing what it's like to move away from, meanness. We've seen a lot of division in our country, across the world, the last couple of years. Maybe, people are actually coming together across partisan divides and saying, wait a minute, we're all human, we're all suffering together. Can we actually learn and see what it's like to be kind to each other and see that it is so much more rewarding to do that than to be mean to each other, and hopefully have that shift, even if it shifts back a little bit, but shifts so far away from that meanness that it's impossible to go back. So that's what I would hope for all of us, is to just really notice what it's like to be kind, notice what it's like when somebody's kind to you, and then, rinse and repeat, and do that as much as possible while we're all in this together before things go, or, before we get out the other end of this. And I don't even know what that's going to look like.
Well, Judd, I think we're all hoping that it's going to look way better than how we were functioning before. I think we can all agree that, things as usual, or the old way of doing things was not getting us where we wanted to be in all arenas of life. So this is a huge opportunity. So thank you so much. I love what you said there. Thank you so much for teaching us about how the brain habit loops work. I wish we could have you on for 5 more hours so that we could address all these questions. But where, one of the questions that's coming up is around practice. And in the chat room, people have been asking, how much time do I need to set aside to get my brain working this way? So if you could please comment on that.
I will, and I'll actually admit that I fell on my face with this question because I've been meditating for about 25 years, and I thought that like formal meditation practice was the way to go. And so when I did my first smoking study with helping people quit smoking, we measured how much people practice formal meditation versus informal, which is basically paying attention as they smoked. And it turned out, and we published this, folks can look at my website if they want the references. We found that the informal practices formally moderated the decoupling of craving and smoking much more than the formal practices did. And that was a real eye-opener for me. And we got 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment for smoking. So this worked, mindfulness worked gangbusters. And it actually informed how we developed our apps, where we start with these short moments many times that people can practice throughout their day, and they can incorporate it into whatever they're struggling with. So if they're stress eating, they can practice mindful eating. They can notice these urges. If they're worrying, they can map out these habit loops around that. So around practice, what I would say is short moments many times is actually how we break old habits and form new ones. And so, it's not like we have to sit down and formally meditate for half an hour or an hour. We can actually build this right into our, build mindfulness right into our everyday lives. Pay attention. For me, it's like map out a habit loop. See what you get from it. And then what happens when you substitute curiosity or kindness as that mindfulness practice instead of the old habit. And I think of it as that's the bigger, better offer. Our brain's always going to look for something, it's going to take what's better as compared to what's not as good. And so if we pay attention to how these old habits are not serving us, and then we pay attention to how good it feels to step out of them and how good it feels to be kind, and just rinse and repeat, over and over and over throughout the day, short moments many times. So that's how I would answer that one. And that's what our data seems to suggest as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Judd. And I know we're running out of time. So I just want to say thank you so much again, Judd, for sharing your incredible wisdom. I urge everyone who has joined to check out the rest of your work on, I believe it's drjud.com.
Yeah, DRJUD. Yeah.
.com. And for all the folks online who want to continue their practice, please know, I hope you know that you have free access, no catches, no credit cards required to the Wise at Work app. So please make sure you download that so that you can integrate this practice into your daily routines. And please come back. We're going to be doing this every Wednesday till the end of June. So please join us, and you can find out more information about what we do at wisdomlabs.com as well. So thank you so much for all your questions. Thank you for participating. I love that we are building this amazing community online. This is a time for us to connect, and as Judd so wisely pointed out, to be kind. So thank you again. Have a good rest of your day, and take good care. We'll see you next time. Bye.